I'd like to talk some right now about the key principles of piece coordination and activity, as well as some of the most valuable things that people often don't realize about these type of situations. So let's begin with the game that I personally think has quite a lot of great examples of piece activity, coordination, and development. So white started in this game with d4, and black plays knight f6. This is basically the queen's pawn opening, and black chooses to play the normal Queen's Indian defense. The main idea and difference of that opening as opposed to the others is that in here, instead of immediately fighting for control over the center by playing d5, black sets up the pieces around it. So he would play with b6 plus bishop b7, perhaps sometimes even e6, and should white choose to do a move like knight c3, bishop b4. The plan will be not so much to take control of the center, because that proves difficult, but rather think about positioning his pieces around it. Now this is a very important approach, because a lot of people have that belief that center needs to be taken. Yes, you do need to take the center with pieces, but a lot of the times it is a lot more important that you attack it. That means not so much counter it necessarily, but rather bring pieces around it. Make sure that you get enough forces that will let you to command the middle when need be. And that's really what matters. So basically right after the move of knight f6, of course white plays with knight f3, pawn to b6, g3, e6, c4, bishop a6, b3, and bishop to b4, check. Very important kind of move. Basically what black is doing is he's trying to force white's own bishop to go to a much worse, we could call it, or an inferior position. And that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to lose or anything like that. It just means it will be inferior in its own way for white. So let's see. Bishop b4 check, white played bishop d2, bishop e7. Where you put your pieces is incredibly important from the very beginning of the game, because the initial structure or formation determines quite a bit about what the pieces are going to do, what they will make, and generally how the middle game develops in most of the time. This is why it's so important that not only you try to develop your own pieces on good squares, but you also try to make your opponents to go to squares that they don't belong. Like in this case, we do have that idea of white's bishop just being badly placed in d2, taking away the natural squares of other pieces like the knight and some others. So in that sense, after bishop to e7, of course, there was the idea that black is able to do well. So what did white do in here? Well, white decided to play alongside knight c3 himself. He was clear about that because this actually makes a good sense. It sets up, first of all, the support over the center, and if white is able to move his e-pawn right through, driving it up against the e4 and even e5, that would put quite a bit of challenge to black. See, the main idea of any opening is control of the center. That means the many pieces you get to position in the middle, or you get to place around it, the more opportunities will come out as a result. That was very important for white, as he's literally, moving close and getting better down the middle any second now. So it's a beautiful thing to remember. A lot of the times, just the plan that you gotta go with is just about that. Bring in forces, set them up and close, and move them so that they can direct different type of pressure and tactics. See, when you have that happen, there is very little bad that can happen to you. See, white has made sure that these pieces he's got have what they need in order to deliver. We've got not just the e4 move, but we also have that ability to think of a move like e5. and then also present different kind of tactics versus black's position. So let us see exactly what happened in this game. After the move of pawn knight to the c3, which was very important, then okay, obviously black has to figure out where to go. So in the game, he decided to play with d5. So after d5, c takes to the d, there was the move of knight takes to the d5. Now, who favors, or like, what will be, like the favor in the middle? Is it going to favor white? Is it going to favor black? What we could say about this? Well, here is the idea. Whenever an exchange takes place, the one who it favors is always the player who gets more lines and possibilities as a result. Something really important to realize right now is that it is going to be white who ultimately gains most out of that opening. And that's actually pretty good for him, because if white is able to get the most out of it, he'd be able to develop, he'd be able to create different sort of challenges, and that's beautiful. So remember, pawns, the way they move, the way they change, the way they shift, it must always go according to the pieces. And I mean, not so much generally the way the pieces move, but what they can do, where they go. Now, the truth is, white is able to do an exchange, taking and bishop to the g2, making it clearly great for the light square bishop to develop and line itself up around the center. Moving up close against the d5 pawn is certainly going to prove very important, especially when we back it up with moves like knight e5. It's all very beautiful, and at the same time, it is going to be problematic because the majority of black's pieces are fairly backward. So you see, where did black make the mistake? He actually had a good intention, but he played knight takes d5. Now, there's a big rule about piece play. That rule goes like this. Whatever happens, try to not move and open the position, exchange, or do anything like this until you reach the middle game. Now, why is that rule so important? Because if you don't follow it, now this is super, super important. If you do not follow that rule, what will often occur is that you are going to be in the situation or in the condition where, you start advancing and attacking and doing different things while your pieces and your development are going to stay back. They're going to fall down and not work. Brilliant advice I can give you. Stay away from moves or ideas that will too quickly open the position or expand in that way. That's going to help you a lot when you actually come down to playing. So let's take a look. And indeed, after the exchange, apparently what black did was the move of knight takes to the d5 himself. Then there was knight takes to the d5, pawn takes to the d5. Okay, that wasn't all too bad. I mean, black did his best to keep things around. And then, okay, so after the exchange recapture, this whole thing looks like a fine position for black. Bishop g2, knight d7, short castles, a rook c1, a rook e8, a rook e1, c5. I have to admit, it does feel like a move that black needed to do for a little bit. He needed to make sure that the pawn break happens, and now there's a good possibility, an attack and challenge over the white center. So what's going to happen next? Well, white played bishop to e3, and I have to admit, this was actually interesting. This move happened out of a fairly passive position. So all of a sudden, white is making a move that feels off in a way. So why does that move really occur? Why do we do it? It is because all white is doing is he'd like to keep the pieces closer. Now remember, keeping the pieces close can give you an incredible opportunity to stay well. If you don't have your pieces close enough, it's not going to work too nicely. So when White played with the move of bishop to the e3, he realized very well that everything was about the ability for the pieces to be close to one another, the chance for more resources, and then in case, of course, if Black exchanges, there's going to be retaking, like possible challenge versus d5. It's pretty good. So bishop e3. Remember, pieces must always try to walk towards a single point in the game. Not towards 2, 3, 4, or anything like that. A single particular point where you could really line up all your forces and make sure that things are going. What happens now is that we actually get that chance. We're having the ability to stay up, look close, and get ready for an attack. Now, if Black doesn't exchange on the d4, we're really going to recapture, and we're going to have that ability to attack against the d5 and stay pretty well. So again, remember that goal. Line up your pieces and push them so they're close and around the middle. So what happened after the move of bishop e3? Well, the interesting thing is that after bishop e3, Black played bishop back to b7. And this was the moment where White decided, okay, what I'm going to do is I would like to play bishop to the h3 here. It was good. Bishop h3, c takes d4, and bishop takes the d4. Knight f6, rook c2, bishop b4, rook f1. Black pushed the bishop up to the a6 in this moment. And now we've got a really important situation. What is all this about right now? Well, basically speaking, Black applies pressure. Having both bishops directly involved and challenging e2 is eventually something that White has to worry about, and there is problem. But there is no threat. Yes, there is pressure by Black, but no threats yet. This gives us time. Now remember that. A certain player needs to create threats if he's going to make anything that dangerous in this moment. You see, the thing is that Black does not have that type of ability yet. He does not have the ability to create threats. So, knight h4, bishop f8. Now, something you have to remember is that backward moves always fail one's position. When Black moved back with his bishop on f8, this was a clear indicator that something is going off balance and is just going to lead to more trouble as it continues. Don't do it like that. See, I think that Black just didn't know exactly what to do, and so he simply picked up on a move that felt, kind of natural, but it really just didn't fit. It didn't mesh too well. Why is that? Because the white knight now stores itself further into the black position by going down to f5, and this is going to get a bit too ugly as the position progresses. Now remember this. Activity is measured by two things. First thing, where the pieces are. That means how advanced they are, how important they feel. And the second is what they actually do. See, you cannot measure them in any other way. Where they are and how important they are is always going to determine the value of any given position of any given point. And you'd like to be very careful, very precise about all this. Now we could see that idea of white placing that knight on the f5 square, keeping up the pressure, and black's pieces are just not ready. It's not just that they're behind or backward. I mean, that is the case. There's no question about that. But he's got to worry. F6 is something that he's got to be worried about. G7 is something that white controls. That's a big deal. So one of the most important things always is where the pieces are, what they're doing, and how you position them, because ultimately it is up to you where you choose to have the forces to go to. Well, that was great. And in the end of the day, after the move of knight f5 happened, black played knight e4. And now it's interesting that we could actually get to talk about the difference between activity versus effectiveness. Activity is when the pieces are simply advanced or not. But effectiveness is also what they're actually doing. Something interesting about that is that black's knight feels like it's very advanced in its current position, but if you think about it more closely, it doesn't do anything. So if you compare it to the white knight on e3, which also feels advanced, yet it's not that advanced, the black knight is actually kind of inferior. However strange that may sound, because the black knight simply does not have that influence. White's knight pressures d5, keeping black a little behind and off, while the black knight on e4 just sits a little bit more advanced, and that's about all it does. It doesn't have value, it doesn't have strength, it doesn't actually make anything too powerful being where it is. That's a big deal thing. And so after knight e3, what is black going to do? I mean, considering the d5 tension and how behind he is, surely that doesn't look too great. Well, what black decided to make in this position was simply to play queen d6, develop well. It was interesting. So what is white supposed to do now? Well, I'm guessing the key point is that, most importantly, white has to continue regrouping. So the thing about queen c1 is that white's really preparing and getting ahead, bringing over his pieces so they can have that value, that like importance. So what's really coming up in the next moves? Well, after queen c1, the whole thing is that apparently black is a bit behind, so he's not loving that position. He played with the move of rook to the d8, so which was kind of interesting. And then what is white going to do? He plays rook to d1 in order to advance. Now remember this idea. Advancing always comes down to one thing, and one thing in particular. It's the resource of just getting more forces or more pieces into the play. Now, why is this so important to do? For a number of reasons. First and foremost, it's just getting the chance to bring in more attacking power. So secondly, it's because you could plan it ahead, and then you can make sure that each of these pieces has the value to be relevant. Now we take a look at this and you could see what that means. We've got the d5 actually to exercise very solid pressure at. We've got black's pieces a little bit behind and off. We've got him a little on the downside. It's really all you need to do. Regroup, advance, solidify the pieces. When you do that, I guarantee you, you're going to have what we need in order to start attacking. So that was a very important move. And then what's coming up next move? I mean, okay, so after the move of rook to the d1, it's black played queen to h6, and then white played bishop to the g2, knight g5. You see, black made a terrible mistake. What was it? It was a backward move he did. Never do these. See, the whole thing about backward moves is that backward moves in general tend to stand off as ugly. Now, this is really, really important. You do not want to stay ugly. You do not want to go backward. Backward kind of moves are off and away. Now, turning it in a terrible situation for him. Key point to remember. Never go back, never walk away, never step down and move out. Why? Because it's going to get you in trouble. That's what black is doing actually right now, and this is where, it's getting him so horribly. So let's see after that move. I mean, in the end of the day, after the move of bishop to the g2 happened, knight g5, and then this move, you could see the danger, that black is in. Most of his own forces completely unable to move. I mean, he played with knight h3 check, hoping to step in and attack, but it just doesn't matter. Knight g5, king g1, knight h3 here, and h4. You see, none of the pieces of black feel really coordinated in any way. None of them feel like they have the ability to step up and go somewhere. They all feel off and away. They all feel rather useless. That's what you have to understand about such positions. How do you get to have your forces come around and stand up powerfully and ahead against the opponent? Knight e4, knight g4, queen e6, bishop h3, black did bishop a3, and of course queen takes a3. I mean, the whole thing about this exchange and all that, it just felt completely off. And just completely uncharted. I mean, I don't even know what black was hoping for when he did that. Queen takes a3, bishop takes e2, rook takes e2, and now suddenly what you realize is this: every single sacrifice taking place here is completely off balance. What does that mean? It means that it's unprepared. It doesn't feel like it's something ready. It's something that ends in entrusted within a solid position and development. Black's just making it out of nowhere, and the result is, okay, well, you did 1 or 2 nice captures. So what? How does that really bring anything more? It doesn't. Truth is that black is just hoping to shoot ahead without really any preparation or the development, setup, or anything of that kind in the line. So that's really getting white perfect. So remember that kind of idea. Every time when it comes down to development or preparation, you'd like to think carefully. You'd like to be very, very precise and analyze. Because now the rook takes to the e2, there is really nothing that black could do except maybe to capture in g3, but then we're going to retake. We're going to actually retake. We got the king moving away, and it's not going to work. It's pretty important to remember. And then, of course, what's happening in that moment. So if the rook takes the e2, then black played knight takes g3, and queen takes d2. But even when it looks like the combination is actually going to work, and maybe some of those tactics are actually going to help, they don't. They really do not. It's interesting, but it's about nowhere as good or relevant. So white is winning. Simple, specific, and ready, relevant enough to guarantee us the advantage. What did black do after that? Well, I mean, he played knight h5, king h2, a rook to d6, and now, of course, I guess black can continue with his own attack, but it's not really going to last for long, especially considering white's ability to play with queen to the d2, and that this is going to lead to an imminent exchange or the retreat of black's own queen. Either way, whatever comes from that is going to mean black is going to have to worry. His own king side is going to be just a little bit weak due to what's happening there, and that's a great idea. Remember the goal. In these kind of positions, it's always about what pieces you could use, what forces of development you can actually utilize as the power source to continue and conduct your position more successfully. White was able to dominate this. So again, some of the key points to learn from. First and foremost, to begin with this, make sure that you focus on every single move about weaknesses, unprotected pieces, and overall the structure. This is going to help you to determine what you can attack or what you can make better. In that middle game, white was able to set up a much better structure. Not because there were immediate weaknesses, but because he was able to focus on challenging. Second thing, make sure that when tactics do appear, you keep things simple. Even though the position opened up at that point, it never came to the moment where either a white was in danger or there was a possibility for a danger. Why? Because at any single moment, white was keeping everything as simple and as stable as you possibly could have. That helped a lot. More importantly, going forward with a couple of the next moves, the idea of the third thing, fight off the opponent's most advanced pieces. You see, in this case, white didn't quite follow that. So what do I mean then? Well, what I mean is that when I say fight off, I literally mean look at what those pieces are, where they stand, and what they can do. If they cannot do all that much, if they cannot be all that dangerous, well, that's perfectly fine with you. You see, the idea itself, in and out of itself, is to concentrate on these pieces and understand or know the value. The fact is that white had a very good challenge versus the d5. And he kept black behind as none of the black home forces or pieces just stood up and had the ability to go anywhere. It was important, steady, and relevant as it worked around. Beautifully played. Again, that's the main point. Remember that you have to let the opponent to make the mistakes. You can't push him, nor you can actually make anything immediate or dangerous to happen. But if you give yourself enough time to set the pieces together and around, if you make them carefully set against the opponent, things are just going to go quite nice. I love the way on how white was able to do it. Not just because of the extra pressure versus d5, but also the direction that black simply couldn't fight off and stabilize. That's what you do. Step by step, brilliant sequence, very little of a possibility for black to complicate, and then surely in a couple of nice moves, after a couple of nice moves, just white was able to be incredibly successful or great with his tactics. That's the way you can go about it. Effective, smart, and brilliantly well played. So this is all I'd like to mention actually about this game, and again about piece activity to start with. So let's continue.